Right. So this is kind of the general flow we'll be going through today. I'll introduce myself. I mean, a lot of people who are, I would say, frequent attendees of VanQ meetups, they would know me more. But if somebody's attending for the very first time, I'll take some time to introduce myself and Cymax Group as well. Um, and then we'll kind of go through why we would land in such a situation where we possibly would need to test without having probably, very good documentation or very good requirements. I'll try and substitute as much as I can with real world examples. I mean, we do have some hypothetical situations, but it's definitely helpful to be able to relate it to real world scenarios and real world projects that we may have tested, I myself may have tested, or my team would have undertaken. So I'll try and give as many examples where I can. And of course, we would kind of close it off to kind of summarize the discussion. We will have some time towards the end where I would love if you could share your side of, or your experience as well. Pretty sure, I mean, somebody one time or the other may have participated or found themselves in a situation where, the expectation is that they are supposed to sign off on a defect-free application, but you don't really know anything about the application. There's no set of documentation. So I'm pretty sure, I mean, everybody would have their bittersweet experiences with this. So I would love to hear more about it. Definitely, I mean, making it as interactive as we can. Right. Moving on to the introduction, a little bit about me. My name is Neha, and I actually am now the Director of Business Process Improvement quite recently. I kind of took on the leadership position, and I'm part of a team called Business Operations, where we are basically a backbone, or not the backbone, but we are the support. We are a supporting function for the rest of the organization to enable them to do what they have set out for themselves in terms of objectives. So that's the role of the business operations team. That being said, I still manage the software testing team. So my team has grown, of course, to build more capacity for me to undertake something even bigger. And I mean, yeah, that's a little bit about me. About Cymax Group. Cymax Group actually has been, it was founded in 2004. So we have been in the business for quite some time now. Our head office is in Burnaby, and our clients are all over North America, I would say. But primarily our customer base, our actual end customers are in US. As a company, Cymax Group, as a company, our mission is to make e-commerce easy for everybody. The Cymax group of brands are listed on the screen here. So we have Freight Club, we have Channelgate, we have Cymax Business, and we have HomeSquare. I'll just briefly share a little bit about each of them. Freight Club is basically our technology solution to make shipping easier for everybody. As a member, you're given access to the drop shipping and online retail expertise with best rates and delivery service. Channelgate is actually Channelgate is a platform that we've built in the last 2 years, I would say, and it simplifies multi-channel e-commerce, allowing manufacturers to leverage a single inventory and product feed to sell across multiple channels. And that's basically a value add into the e-commerce chain based on what we've seen and learned over the last 1.5 decade. And Cymax Business is actually our B2B e-commerce website, and HomeSquare is our B2C e-commerce website. So that's kind of, our family of brands. And that being said, and I put it in green out there and a smiley face because I think since I have been with Cymax, this is the first year we've seen that, we have a lot of open positions, all the way from operations to tech positions. So if you are looking for a job, or if you have somebody who's looking for a job, feel free to go to our website and have a look there. And if you think that something interests you, feel free to contact me or send your application online, and we'll take it from there. Other than my day job and what I do at Cymax, I'm also the board of director at a nonprofit called SQUIST, which stands for Society for Canadian Women in Science and Technology. It was founded in 1981, and as it stands right now, it is one of the longest standing nonprofit to encourage and advance women and girls in STEM. The website is listed on the slides if anybody of you interested to learn more about it or to volunteer your time in there or to even contribute or partner. That being said, I am also, I have my own practice. I am a regulated Canadian immigration consultant, and my aim really to set up an immigration practice was to facilitate the growth of technology in Vancouver and to kind of retain and bring over the best talent. So that's kind of where I'm going with this practice, but we'll see. We will probably in 5 years, we can revisit and see how it went. All right, enough about me, enough about SciMax. Let's now talk about the actual topic for the VanQ webinar, which is testing without requirements. So let's get started. Right, so the paradox. It's funny when you think about the expectation to test without requirements. Technically, no applications are built without requirements. I mean, there has to be some purpose to what's being built. All software ideally, have requirements, whether they're documented or not. So requirement-less software isn't actually a possibility. It's supposed to do something. If there were no requirements, no direction, starting point, the application would just be, I would say, what you see on the slides right now, a software that does nothing, a staircase that goes nowhere, and which is probably not true. So if we look at it, our problem really is the documentation and not the requirements themselves. The requirements may be there somewhere, probably in some person's head or whoever designed it, but it's just not documented. So the real problem or the real root cause that could haunt us is actually the lack of documentation. And software without documentation, without documented requirements is a reality. And as I mentioned, we often find ourselves in that situation, especially being the testers. We are like, okay, we get expectations like same as before, should work as usual. And really, it's very, very objective. Very, very subjective, and we don't really know what's expected of us in such situation. The only thing worse is to have documentations that are either insufficient, inaccurate, terribly outdated, and which is also a common scenario. All right, so let's talk about why would we stumble into this not so favorable situation. So, usually us being, when I say us, I'm referring to the testers. Usually for us, we are a support function. So we support the project teams in their deliverables. And we often find ourselves assigned to a project for which, either there's no documentation or the documentation exists, but might not be detailed or complete. Or even worse, not even worse, but it could be outdated as well. Outdated documentation can be it's quite common actually, where the team probably they start documenting at some point, and then, a lot of change happens over time or even too fast. And then, there are multiple channels of communication, things are being maintained at different places, some things in the email, something in the ticket, it's kind of all over. And over time, there's no actual drive to actually go back and update any sort of central documentation. So, that's something that is quite common to see, I would say. And the illustration on the screen right now, we have similar illustrations that we saw when we were studying software engineering. It's quite common, like what we expect, what the client expects, what XYZ expects. So this is a very common illustration. The reason I put it here is, if you think about it, if there is no documentation about what was actually implemented, you don't know what are you testing? Are you testing this tire on the tree, or is it the couch, or is it the ladder? Like, what are you testing? So is it this one, or is it this one, or is it this one? We don't know. Don't know, and not sure, quite frankly. The other reason why, documentation may not be a priority or maybe an issue is because it may just be how things work in that organization, in that team, where, it might actually be a documentation free environment where, the team doesn't believe that there's enough value add to document requirements in any form or way. Or maybe, the team is really keen on, you know pushing out software as soon as they can, so on the fly development, or just having a quick call with the customer, no time to document, let's just have the team in there, just listen to what's happening, let's just code it, let's just package it and ship it. So I mean, it could be a way of working, not that there's something wrong with it, but that could be one of the reasons why you would suddenly find yourself put into a situation where you're now supposed to test it, but nothing's written anywhere, so you don't know what the expected behavior should be. So I mean, sometimes it's not by choice, but it's just, we are assigned to projects like this. So being testers, I think what helps in such scenarios is to kind of take a step back, and then think of non-traditional approaches that can be used to mitigate the situation. And I've kind of collected a few tips that have worked for me, that have worked for my team. I used it 5 years ago. I still use it in some of the recent projects that have come to us. And I have found great deal of success in them. And that's why I wanted to kind of share the tips with the group here. And yeah, so the idea basically is to see how we can get around the challenges that exist. Again, the idea is to optimize the overall test efforts and to bring the best output from the testing cycle. Right. So yeah,
Neha, sorry to interrupt. There's a quick question from one of our attendees, and the question is: was code developed without docs as well? I'm guessing docs is documentation.
So I mean, it really depends. If you're talking about, it could be way of working, then it could be a possibility. I mean, in a very fast-paced environment, and in an organization where the culture is to push out change too fast, yeah, documentation probably would take a back seat. But I think, like, if you go back to where I mentioned, the irony or the paradox, that really no software is built without a purpose. So the requirements are somewhere, probably not documented. So the issue there is documentation, not having requirements at all. But I'm not sure if that, where the question was for, whether it was for the beginning part or for the way of working bit. But if that person has any follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer that.
Okay. I'll let you know. I'll let you know.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So moving on and talking about some strategies. Planning. Planning is key for any projects to be successful. Really, like it's I would say, if we have to go, if you're going for a vacation, you would plan for it. If you're going for a weekend out, you probably at least look up, where you're going, probably have a place to stay, arrange for some things. Same way, I think for testing, whether requirements, documented requirements or no, planning is really, really essential. More so in this case, because we need to sense check. Do we have everything we need? If not, how much time do we need to gather that? Whom do we need to partner up with? Who can help us? How much time do we need for groundwork? Do we need to raise a flag and say, you know what, I need one more person to help me in testing? Like, we need to figure this out sooner, because the more we delay it, the more stuck we're going to be in that situation, and probably we would probably be we'd probably end up being the bottleneck for the whole software process, which definitely we don't want to do. So I think planning is definitely key, and is required to ensure which deliverables are expected from the testing team and types of testing we're going to perform, and of course, also buffering in some time to uh, include all that prep work, because it's not going to be the regular test planning that we are used to with a project that has very well documented requirements and everything is sort of aligning, all the stars are aligning. Probably in this project that's not going to happen, so you may want to actually put sufficient buffers to allow sufficient time for the team to actually do the prep, do the test planning and execute it as well. Right, investigation. Um, I am curious by nature. I love investigation. And my favorite author is actually Agatha Christie. So that kind of sums up my investigation inclination. But basically, um, what this tips talks about is spending some time to see or take an inventory of what do we actually have. Do we have any manuals that we can use? Do we have any emails or some demos that may have been done when the product was launched? Could we get access to that? There could be some documentation somewhere. I mean, it could be a frail one, but that's one option. Another one I've seen is like, again, almost like getting in touch with subject matter expert and basically getting a download from them. But you need to identify which person can help you in that, which is again part of the planning, the previous slide that we talked about in planning. With regards to investigation, work with whatever little documentation you have. Again, it could be in the project management software. It could be in your old test cases, recordings, demos, anywhere. Manuals is my favorite one because that's very underrated. But like most of this applications that are developed that were external and or client facing do come with a manual. So I mean that's something that's really underrated. But then if you're able to get one, that brings a lot of perspective, I would say. And gather all this information and prepare your own high level requirement document. What that would do is, again, we are not asking you to suddenly become a business analyst or suddenly become the person who writes the requirements for the whole team. But what is being asked is to like not stop being a tester, but step away from being a tester to just understand how the system works so that you can actually take that on once things are ready for testing. And again, it's just having that, I would say that, operating guidelines or the testing guidelines within which you can test or your team can test whoever, whatever is applicable in this case. But the idea is to get at least a starting point to build on. And of course, the bonus in this case is always, like I mentioned, download from the subject matter expert or even job shadow. Job shadowing is something that we've seen works very well, especially, us being an e-commerce company. We have a lot of, tools that, let's say, our vendors are using to fulfill the orders and our agents are using to do customer service, let's say. So if we are making a change in any module and it's a legacy module, we don't know what it does, we can actually sit down with one of the agent and just see how they are using it, and create our own checklist, create our own user flow, and kind of document what's the critical part. How can we use this information and input that into our testing process? Again, it's not really I'm by no means saying bend over backwards to actually make something happen, but these are, I would say, non-traditional approaches that can provide good input for the testing process. User scenarios and checklist. And again, there are different ways to create user scenarios and checklists. So user scenario is basically, how an end user is using the system. So we are more clear in what the customer or the end user is expecting and how can we accomplish that. Understanding the user scenarios have helped me numerous times to map out the critical path, is what we call it, or the critical functionality, so that we make sure that we pay a lot of attention there and we can prioritize that critical functionality versus something that's probably not as high of a priority for them, or they may not even use it, or maybe is like an edge case. So I think it helps us give perspective as to where we want to focus our test efforts on. You can also create, checklist. Checklist is very, very helpful. Doesn't take too much of an effort to kind of maintain also. It's very easy to add items, remove items, and kind of, change it and tweak it as required. Setting parallel test environments, that's another one of my favorite approaches, especially for applications. I mean, that when we've tried everything else, we don't still know much about it, and we don't really have have time to, investigate further, or we don't have resources to actually first understand completely what it's doing before we can actually jump and release the next version of it, or or launch the version. So this is one approach that I found really helpful, especially with things that I would say, again, like, we have constraint of time, constraint of resources. We've tried a few things. We were not able to actually come to any high level documents, or we were not able to create such because of all these constraints. Setting up parallel test environments really helps in this case. But again, this is something that has to be, I would say, taken with a pinch of salt. This is something that would require judgment on your part as well. There may be a reason this application is being updated. It could be because of defects. It could be because it was designed incorrectly in the first place. Last thing you want is to refer a system which is wrong to actually base your tests off. So there's some level of judgment that's required to kind of balance out how much you should be referring this parallel version of, let's say, the old software, and then having a new version on the new environment, on another environment, and trying to compare it. I mean, it really takes some judgment to still use the situation to get a head start, but then be critical of and basically to question if you should be relying entirely on how it's working right now. All right. Partner with others. And this is something also that I've seen work very well. People are really receptive if we try to reach out to them and try to understand, how we can gather information about the application that we plan to test. As I mentioned, depending on what feature it is, what functionality it is, we partner with different people in the business, within the team to make it happen. So it could be, I don't know, sitting down with the developer to, code review the previous module, which anyhow they're going to do if they're trying to kind of understand how things were implemented and then move it to a different framework, or, update it or whatnot. Why not partner with them and, just sit down with them? I remember this one time where we were trying to understand the logic when orders go on hold for us. And, we tried working with the developer, and because of, again, time constraint resources, that person gave us the name of the stored procedure that was being called. And for us, really, as a team, we had to go through the stored procedure to understand the logic that was implemented, and that gave us, our existing implementation details, and we kind of built from there. Again, I'm not saying that this is something that should be done in all the scenarios, but again, these are some approaches that we've used in the past that has helped us in refining our test efforts and also delivering the projects with minimal risk, I would say. And some of the things that you can do is, again, job shadow, attend meetings, client meetings or project meetings, or meetings with business users, or whether it's partnering with the developer, or whether it's partnering with the business analyst, partnering with the project manager, and just being mindful that arrange for the knowledge transfer at a convenient time. Make sure, check in if the person's okay, with you tailing them or like job shadowing them. Just make sure that, it works for both the parties. And it works out very well overall. The next strategy that we use is risk-based testing. And of course, I mean, this is not unheard of. Risk-based testing is basically is based on the probability of risk. And risk is basically an uncertain event, positive or negative, that could affect the outcome of the project. This is something that, irrespective of whether we have requirements or not, this is something that can be easily implemented. I mean, this can be implemented for any sort of projects, really. What it really involves is assessing the risk based on the software complexity, criticality of business, frequency of use, possible areas with defects. Again, this could be based on your historical knowledge of the project. So for example, whenever we touch XYZ module, there is an unintended impact on YZ module. So, I mean, it can be based on the historical knowledge, or it could be, the current evaluation of where we think there is maximum risk, or where we have more critical components or critical functionality residing. Um, After identifying or assessing the risk, items are kind of prioritized, and then the tests are executed according to the priority order. And yep, if we want to talk about risk-based testing, I think it needs a webinar by itself. I mean, it's a very huge, I would say we can discuss about that all, for hours at ends, but really it is something that can be easily used in scenarios or projects where we don't have much luck in terms of documented requirements. Ad hoc testing. Um, Ad hoc testing is something I haven't done much of. I go with the next one, which my favorite is actually what's listed in the next slide. But basically, while doing research online, I noticed that a lot of project teams were referring to ad hoc testing. And the main purpose, again, as purpose with any kind of test activities, to uncover the defects. Some interesting approaches, monkey testing. I've never done that, but I'll be interested to hear if you have first-hand experience in that. But again, the purpose is to break the system, which is, I think, true irrespective of the approach you're following. I mean, ultimately, that is kind of our goal, not to break the system, but to find the defects or to uncover the problem areas. Pair testing, so we can have two testers kind of pair up and do the testing, or even buddy testing. Again, these approaches is something I have not personally used, but again, in my research, I came across it and I decided to include them in our in the talk today. Exploratory testing. This is my favorite kind of testing. I love it. What you're seeing in your screen is Alice in Wonderland. I feel like Alice in Wonderland the moment I get a go ahead, or like, go crazy, go find, go learn more about the application. So it's still my favorite kind of testing. It gives me a fair, unbiased view of how the software should work. It If I'm doing the exploratory testing and I'm trying to explore the software, click here, let's see what it does. I think I'm going with a very, I would say, clean perspective. So I'm not biased into, oh, I think it should be doing this. Oh, I read it somewhere. So it's very, I would say, cleaner perspective. And I love exploratory testing. And it's unstructured. So you can click wherever you want. And yeah, there's no structure there, which is kind of what makes it exciting and non-boring for me, I would say. I would be really bored clicking on the same things, doing the same sequence of steps. But yeah, in general, testers do minimal planning and maximum execution if using this approach. And the test design and test execution activities run in parallel. Again, as I mentioned, it's not structured. That means, some activities kind of maybe happening in parallel or too close to each other, and not like in set intervals. It doesn't seem like it. I think I'm hearing an echo, but okay. It doesn't seem like that the test design should necessarily complete before moving into test execution. And then testers can document key aspects of the application during execution. All right.
Neha, there's a question we have from
Yep.
Eileen. And the question is, what is the difference between ad hoc and exploratory testing?
Yeah, so that's where I was trying to say that I have never used ad hoc myself, but I think the research on the internet is pretty clear on what they are calling ad hoc versus exploratory. So let me just go back on the slide here. While I was doing the research, I mean, these are the kind of testing approaches that were written as counted as ad hoc testing. Again, it is, I would say, not completely structured. Seems like we are still randomly kind of testing, as you can see, for monkey testing, for pair testing. I mean, it's just, I mean, I don't have a clear answer for that. I think it overlaps. Ad hoc could have an overlap. I mean, it is unstructured. Exploratory is unstructured. I've never done ad hoc testing. Any of the listed approaches I have never done myself, so I'm not able to answer based on that. But exploratory, yes, anytime. I mean, that is what I go for, especially because I am not involved, let's say, in my current capacity in day-to-day projects. So if I have to kind of sense check or just kind of jump in and see what's going on, exploratory testing is really what I'm doing, because I just don't know the requirement bit, or I'm not too immersed in the project like my testers would be. So that's kind of me. I'm sorry I was not able to provide too much information about ad hoc, but that's really one kind of testing that I haven't done myself. So I don't have much information about that. But it is there online, but it's something I have personally never done. Okay, all right. Moving on. Right. So let's look at some examples. And as I mentioned, I'm gonna, of course, try to anonymize it, and also trying to make sure that I can provide as many real world, I would say, strategies that we applied for it, so that I can share that with you. All right. The very first one is my favorite. A lot of us work in companies that have code that's developed quite long ago. We don't know what it does, at least documented. We know, it is supposed to do something for, this segment of customers, but we don't really know the ins and outs of it, and nobody has touched probably or updated the code in like forever. And if you do end up being assigned to a project where a legacy application is being migrated, I mean, this is what the example actually talks about. So let's say we have a vendor portal that was launched more than a decade ago to facilitate communication with the vendors with regards to the orders by offering end-to-end order management. So, the vendor can go to this portal, log in, check how many orders they received, and then, make sure the orders are packed, ready to go, ready for pickup, and then they can update the status that, the product is shipped out or whatever it may be. So think of the order management in that way. So in terms of order fulfillment. So let's say for this vendor portal, the architecture is not scalable. There are bugs in the system, and it's very difficult to debug or even update, small bits or apply patches. So the business makes the decision to upgrade the vendor portal and integrate seamlessly with the rest of the newer applications that have been developed since vendor portal was launched. So if we are thinking of finding ourselves in this situation, the possible challenges that the testing team would come across, and rather all the teams would come across, is that possibly there's no documentation, considering it is a legacy application, or some documentation may be available, which is not bad, at least would give us a head start, but again, not a complete picture. Or too much information is available. This is what actually, having no documentation or having too much documentation is really, really tricky as well. So imagine having documentation that's probably lying in some, I don't know, what did we have before? I don't know, WordPad formats, or older versions and previous versions of documentation, or the previous documentation tools that nobody uses anymore in the company. So it's kind of, even it is harder to extract meaningful information from such sources. So this test strategy of how we went about developing, a strategy for testing such application, we reviewed the existing documentation, including manuals. And as I mentioned, I mean, manuals are really, really underrated. But when we opened up that vendor portal for vendors, we provided them this, few pages of document, or an actual printed manual. Probably considering the time it was launched, people would still have paper manuals. We would have provided those manuals, and we do have records of that. We do have those manuals with us, so why not use them? Because that is how the product was originally designed. We may have some defects in the backlog, or we may have some you know information lying somewhere that we can dig up possibly. The other approach that worked very well for us was to job shadow internal end users. And this is an example I kind of gave a couple of minutes ago as well. For us, let's say if our customer service agents or our agents are using the same portal, then we'll sit with them for some time, 1 hour, 2 hour, as long as it takes for us to kind of get the information that we need, to just job shadow them and just see how the application works and to identify the critical user flows, which we can then prioritize and pay more attention to. Other than spending time on something that's really edge case, and not something that would really be a deal breaker for the launch. Again, exploration of the application, so just kind of having a test version of it or playing around with the dummy order and see how it goes through various stages. Again, using risk-based testing, as I mentioned. It can be, again, you can, I would say, use a couple of strategies for each project, and it's not set in stone. I mean, it's really what works for you, or works for the project based on what knowledge you have and what you can actually get. And whatever info you have, you can use that to create high level document as a baseline, and then you can go ahead and kind of evolve from there and bring it to the next level as required. All right, so the next scenario could be, and again, this is something we've seen not quite often, but I've seen it numerous times, where shelved projects are suddenly reopened. An example for that could be a project that was started a couple of years ago. It was shelved because, let's say, at that time the business priorities changed, and the business decided to focus on their promoting or kind of investing resources in something else versus this project. And over time, let's say there's a churn in the team, so the original developers are not there, original PM's not there, and it's really one of those projects where we do have code, we can probably figure out what it does, but we don't really have much to get going with. So the possible challenges in this scenario could be, again, no documentation or some documentation. But the other thing is that business needs may have changed over time, and a software that probably was created for users or for business scenarios that were valid a couple of years ago may not actually apply. So I think just taking the information, taking the product as is, would not be the case. There probably, if things have changed over time, there would be talks about probably changing functionality, modules, or whatever as part of launching this project. So that's another one. So there could be change as well. So the test strategy.
Sorry to interrupt you, Neha. There's another question we have from Ashley. Do you want to take it now, or do you want to take it at the end?
Maybe I can just go ahead with the scenarios, and then just before the closing notes, we can have the questions. Yeah,
of course, for sure. Okay, let's do it that way then.
Sure.
Okay.
All right. So the test strategies that can be used for such projects is to get, really, like, we need to understand, do we just work with what we had a couple of years ago and then, start investigating, start reviewing and, get started based on what it is? Or we actually confirm from the product owner or the PM if this is going to be changed any further. If things are going to be changing, there's a very good chance the project's actually going to be scrapped, and then everything would be from scratch, which is actually bittersweet. But then, if it's really that outdated, doesn't even need the business needs, before we go head first and start job shadowing and investigating and finding what we can, a good idea to sense check and check if since it's been a while since the project was first conceptualized to the launch now, what are the nature of changes we are intending to make with this project? That could be a very good starting point. And then, of course, the other things we talked about reviewing existing documentation, job shadowing, exploring the application. If, the previous version was, I would not say shippable, but if it is something that could be deployed or is available to explore. And use whatever info we can find to create a high level requirement. Right. Next one, application. And this is my favorite one. And I just like, I scream from within when I hear requirements like these. Application should work same as before. So there should be no change, but hey, we are refactoring everything. Let's just change a bunch of stuff, but hey, it should be the same as before. And that's we hear that quite often. So if I have to provide some specific examples, it could be, let's say an application being moved into an API-based architecture. And the expectation is that API behaves exactly the same way as the application with or without the interface. Another example could be moving, for an e-commerce website, moving the checkout or updating the checkout from one page to a multi-page checkout, which possibly in the background means, refactoring, updating the triggers, updating libraries, adding validations at multiple spots other than just one page, and so on and so forth. So, it could be all over with such projects. And, the challenges are pretty same as what we talked previously. Again, no documentation, some documentation, or too much documentation. Okay. This test strategies for this one again is, other than reviewing the documentation and exploring the application, identifying, the risks areas and where the areas are, where the defects are most likely going to lie or are more critical, the modules that are more critical. Parallel test environment. So this is one, when we were moving from one page checkout to multi-page checkout, we found it helpful to have, one test environment having, the older version deployed and the other test environment having the multi-page checkout deployed. Not that it was an apple to apple comparison, by no means it was not, but it really helped us in understanding, like, if we came into this particular scenario and we can't really remember or it was not documented what it was implemented, we could easily go, play around this other parallel test environment and get the answer that we need. And yeah, creating checklists as well. When we say everything should work same as before, can you tell us what that everything is so that we can actually create a checklist and make sure that we are reviewing that and we are checking off items from there. Yeah, so Shobik, we can have the question now if you want.
Yeah, for sure. So the question from Ashley is, what kind of measures would you suggest to have in place in post-production phase in case the baseline document slash checklist does not suffice and can lead to a lot of unidentified bugs in the product?
Yeah. Okay. So for me, testing and production is actually a different. It requires a different kind of test strategy for us. So anything that I talked about right now was more applicable. For the test strategies were more applicable before we get to production. But as part of planning, test planning for such applications, definitely planning how we're going to verify this feature slash release on production. That's, I think, one of the very important questions that need to be asked and answered before we kind of sign off and say everything's ready to go. I would say that, for, again, depending on what kind of project it is, what are the unknowns, I would strongly recommend having a verification plan as well as a monitoring plan. So a verification plan is something, that would include whatever you are putting in production or whatever you're shipping out, you're verifying that. And that could be, verifying in the next 15 minutes of deployment, or, in the next hour or so, or something that, that could be immediately validated, I would say. Monitoring is required for projects that, we don't know how they're going to behave over time, or something that, again, happens when something else is triggered on production, and that could be, triggered every third day. So things like that need to be monitored. And an example for that would be, let's say, monitoring. Okay, so let's say, we had an enhancement, again, because we are an e-commerce company. I'm just giving you an e-commerce space, e-commerce related example. Let's say, we change something in the return module. We realistically can only verify how the return process is working once we do have a return. We may have a return on day one. We may have a return probably in day 5. We don't know. But then we had to kind of figure out a way to have, or figure out, I would say, our part to play in such kind of verification and monitoring process. Again, like, it has to be, everything needs to be, I would not say nailed down, but at least figured out before we hit production. Another example is, like, if we are releasing any kind of performance improvement feature. So, we if we are releasing something that would cut down, I don't know, the page loading time by X%, to validate that, I mean, you need to observe the system or monitor the system over a period of time. So once you do, make the changes on production, you would need to use some sort of monitoring tool, application insights, Sumo Logic, like whatever it may be. Uh, you know, we need to have that time to verify. So I think testing on production requires a not completely different, but a slightly different approach. But whatever I kind of listed as of the last couple of minutes, since the session started, it was more geared towards the test strategies to follow, in the planning, preparation, and execution phase. And this is all before we hit production. Yeah. Okay.
I think that answers the question.
Okay, that's great.
We have one more question from one of our participants. The question is, should we return, in quotes, workflow tested on UAT before release to PRD? Now, this is too technical for me, so I have no idea what this means.
So the UAT would be the user acceptance test cycle, right? PRD, now, I've heard different I would say full forms for it. It could be, production readiness. It could be, the one of the requirement, documentation, one of the requirement documentation. So can you read the question again? I just got caught up in the acronyms.
So here they are talking about PRD equals production. So the question is, should we return workflow tested on UAT before release to PRD? I think they mean before release to PRD.
Like, I think they're talking about before releasing to production. I mean, like return as in like, reject, or like what are we talking about? So just to give you an example, for us, if we are most of the projects that we work on, all the major stakeholders are embedded in the project planning from day one, including the testers, including the business users. So everybody's kind of embedded in the system. While my team focuses on functional testing, performance testing, API testing, like whatever it may be based on the needs, the UAT testing is actually handled by and coordinated by by the business analyst or the product analyst or whoever may be supporting the project. And our team helps in creating those scenarios for business users, again based on our understanding of the end user behavior and whatnot. For us, it works very well because everybody's embedded in the process, all steps, every step of the way. Everybody's kind of in sync. So we've never seen, a, a, a piece of a shippable piece of code going all the way to UAT stage and then rejected outright, saying that, oh, actually this is not what we wanted. I mean, we haven't seen it. I've heard about such scenarios. I think in industries or organizations that work in more silos, where either the client may be external or the users may be external. But I think like the industry, I mean the organizations I've been working with, I mean, in the past also, I mean, I've noticed if with more silos, I think there's more chance of misalignment or communication not happening, or miscommunication. So there I have seen such scenarios, but I think if everybody is kind of engaged in the process from the starting, it is a smoother sailing, I would say, for everybody involved. And of course, like, I mean, decisions can be made, and that is where the test exit criteria could be selected, or the sign off criteria could be selected, where it's like, okay, no critical bugs, or whatever bugs we have, we make an agreement to, I don't know, fix it in the next release, and we are good to go as is. I mean, it's an agreement. So I have not seen in the last couple of years where we had to kind of revert back or come back from an advanced stage to kind of start from scratch. Probably for shelved projects, yes, it does happen, but like we don't really get to the UAT, formal UAT phase without getting that sense check done before. Yep.
Okay. Are there any other questions from any of our participants? Um, there's one more question from Abby, and it says, "What is your view about a business analyst who relies on developers to design the application, basically just giving a very high level requirements and leaving the design to devs? QA testers cannot prepare test scenarios until after devs have deployed to testing environment."
Yeah, this is something that, is a challenge, definitely. And it happens, I've seen quite a bit of it. I'm not saying it happens, in SciMax, but I have seen and I've heard a lot about it. I think it's just, again, nothing against, particular member of the team, but I think it's just, somebody's taking an easy way out and this needs to be called out. But I think it is not fair to not have the testers be embedded and in on the same step as, let's say, a developer. So my issue, with this whole situation is that, one particular support team, that's the QA team, is being blindsided while some other teams are, at different levels of understanding of how the product should function or is functioning, which is, I think, very unfair. Although, it does happen. But I think in this case, if you guys have a retrospective, like whoever asked the question, I would ask to call out, because it's really, I mean, it should be the other way round. If you understand what I'm saying, it should not be, again, nothing against a developer, nothing against, business analyst or requirement analyst, but from where I see it, there needs to be a common direction that needs to be set, or the tone needs to be set, or the requirements need to be set, or the expectations need to be set by whoever's managing the project, whether it's analyst, PM, product manager, whoever that person may be. And every supporting team has to follow suit. So the DevOps team has to do what they are supposed to do based on the information provided. The developers have to work on, what they have to do based on the information provided. So I think having, this the other way, where, something's provided, the developers make something out of it, I just see it as very skewed and, not a really great way of managing things, because ultimately, I mean, I don't know how successful the product's going to be. And definitely not fair on the testing team in this regard. And that is what I have been a really big advocate of, to have, to give the same place on the table to the testers as, the developers have, or somebody who's in DevOps team has. So it's a fair, everybody has the same place, I would say, and everybody should have the same start for the race that everybody is going to get into. I mean, it's not fair if somebody has, an early start or a late start. I mean, it's just not fair.
Okay. Any other questions from any of our other participants? I'll just give it a couple of more seconds just in case somebody's
Sure, and
frantically
probably
trying
towards the end
to.
to type.
Yeah,
That's okay. These are closing notes are just like 2-3 slides to just sum up, and then we could
yeah,
bring up things towards the end.
for sure. Okay,
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
let's carry
Great.
on then.
Mm-hmm. All right. So these are just closing notes, just to kind of summarize what we talked about in the last few minutes. And again, starting from the irony, we are told there are no requirements, but really, I mean, nothing. Application is not developed without, thinking about what it's going to do. So there are requirements, probably not documented. So, I mean, document requirement less software is not a possibility, but it's really the problem is documentation. Software without documented requirements is a reality, and then most of us have been part of such teams, one point or the other. You may find yourself in such a situation if you're assigned to work on a project for which no documentation exists, or it exists but it's not detailed or complete. or the requirements are outdated, or actually, if that is how the team works, or if that is how, things are done. Again, there's nothing wrong in that approach, but it's harder. I think it's more challenging, and then more non-traditional approaches need to be applied for test planning. Again, don't lose hope. All is not lost when there's no documentation. There's still some ways where we can either find documentation or create our own. I mean, really, like, we could do it too. And I'm not saying, taking on all the responsibility from the product analyst or from the PM. Really, like, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying to have, to get a well-rounded knowledge about the application under test from various sources, and then input that information into the testing team so that they can successfully execute and deliver a good quality product. And the approaches that we talked about is planning, investigation, setting up parallel test environments, exploratory testing. So I'm not going to list all of them, but yeah, those were the 7 or 8 things we talked about in the past. All right. So even though having no documents is a challenge, I mean, I think it works out well for testers in some cases. So some testers may find unstructured, ad hoc or exploratory testing more exciting, as opposed to being restricted by a defined test plan. I'm one of those people, but I expect my team to do more structured testing. But yeah, I mean, I would rather do more exploratory and more random testing because I can, and also because, probably that would be a fresher perspective on how the application behaves, or how, in my understanding of the application. All the prep and the groundwork can help testers in getting a well-rounded understanding of the application, and that is, where um, I have seen a lot of teams, or a lot of times, I would say, people struggling with tunnel vision. So it's like, just work off what is provided to you, and not kind of, think outside of whatever is provided. And that, unfortunately leads to tunnel vision. So tunnel vision is a medical term. I mean, it just means that the person who has tunnel vision can see only what's directly in front of them and nothing in the peripheral. So it's a medical term, but it's very commonly used in software engineering as well. So when somebody says, XYZ has a tunnel vision, what they really mean is that the person is looking at things from a very narrow perspective and is not seeing, or is not aware of all the facts. And I mean, as testers, this is a risk for us. So I think it really helps documented requirements, yes or no, I mean, whether they're there or not, to actually use some of these approaches that we talked about, to see if we can, avoid the tunnel vision. And then, yeah, of course, using whatever information we have gathered, and then use that as a baseline, and then kind of develop from there. All right, so here we are. I would love to hear your experiences. If you were part of such project, how was it handled, or how you struggled with, or how do you think the suggested approaches could work for you, and also if you have any questions.
Okay, that was a great presentation, Neha. Now I think the floor is open to questions. So if any of you have any other questions that you'd like to ask Neha, now is your time. Okay. Let's see if we get any more questions for you. I think we got some good questions during the presentation.
Yeah.
I'll give it a minute or so, just in case somebody's typing out a question. Also, feel free to raise your hand if you'd like me to unmute you. So if you want to have like a, more interactive Q&A session, I'd be happy to facilitate that as well. Okay. Anyone want to share their experiences with testing, or what else you want to improve upon? How, if you need any help or anything along those lines, feel free to put that out as well.
Or if somebody can tell me, I'll be really interested to hear, and rather I'll be surprised if somebody can tell me that they've never been in this situation before. They have no idea what I'm talking about, in the sense that, they've always been blessed to be part of those projects that have always wonderful requirements, beautiful mock-ups, and everything's kind of there. I would love to hear that as well. If somebody, has been that lucky, I really envy you, but I'll be open to hear about it.
Anybody? Okay. So I think that's all the questions
Sure.
we had from our participants today.
Mhm.
Uh, Hold on. We might just have. Uh, there's a question, another question from Abby, and the question is: we don't have an X. I'm guessing. I think it's supposed to be UX
Mhm.
expert.
Mhm.
Yeah. The question is: we don't have a UX expert in our team. Should we expect business analysts to be knowledgeable in UX user design?
I mean, UX or user experience is actually a different job function entirely. I mean, designing the best interface for your customers to kind of, engage them the most, and kind of, again, get the best ROI or best acquisition, again, depending on the application, the terminology would vary. But I mean, user experience designers are actually, a completely different function, similar to, specialized developers and whatnot. So it's a completely different function. But I mean, for me, I have seen that the if there are analysts assigned to the project, they are the ones creating the mock-ups, or at least, having some sort of a wireframe. That's another kind of term they use. Or even, a simple, I don't know, a user flow diagram in Draw.io, or any flow chart symbols that are available, in Word. Very common. It's very easy to create small visuals, I would say. Like, it may not be like exactly top of the line, fancy looking mock-ups if the person's not really skilled on it, but really to make somebody understand, okay, approximately that's where the button goes, and when you click here, this is what it should be doing. I mean, it's very easy to explain that without using too many advanced tools. So it is easily achievable, with Word, with Confluence. We use Confluence for a lot of our documentation, and it works out beautifully because it does have a lot of inbuilt macros. Draw.io, we can use tables, we can put images. So it works really well for us because we use Confluence for documentation. So, I mean, really the expectation is not for one person to be magic, do the magic and kind of make sure that everything's kind of provided. There are some teams that are very well, I would not say funded, but they have all the resources they need to make it happen. So, there's a dedicated, UX person, there's a dedicated, analyst who actually has time to create wireframes and mock-ups and review it with the business. And, oh, do you want this in this? Should we put the banner here? Should we put this there? So there are some teams that do have that luxury to invest that resources. Most often, it is an area that's underrated. So, sometimes you're even lucky if you have a front end developer in your team, but it really depends. So I would say that it is not a necessity that you have to engage top inline tools to actually create any sort of visuals. If somebody has a very good command of language, or very good way of explaining, you don't really need to kind of have a picture. You can even write it. It should be at the top right hand side of the corner. The button should be there. It should be red in color, or whatever the color needs to be, and when you click it, it should do this. I mean, even if somebody is able to write this in natural language, or a simple language, I mean, that's the requirements for us. I mean, those are the documented expected behavior. We know there should be a button. We know it should be clickable. We know when we click, it should do whatever's listed in there. So it kind of gives us that guidance that we need to do testing when we are when it comes to us. So I think, to answer the question, no, it's not a necessity. There are ways to get the same level of information by not going so, specialized, I would say. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for your question, Abby. Anyone else have any other questions? I'll give it a couple seconds. Okay. I think that's all the questions that we
Sure.
have
Mm-hmm.
for this presentation. Uh, Thank you again for that great presentation,
Sure.
Neha, and thanks for taking out the time today despite your busy schedule. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure
Thank you.
our participants do too. Thanks for tuning in, and also thanks to all our participants for joining. Our next VanQ is on March 25th, and we'll have Alex who will be presenting on that day. I'll post the topic of the presentation early next week, so please stay tuned, and hope you all have a great evening. Thanks again, Neha.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.